Hi, so for my simulation activity that I did today was that I went for a nature walk on crutches. So I was doing a simulation activity that could be similar to someone that has any kind of leg impairment or even an amputee. And I realized that the crutches that I was using are normally for people with a temporary injury, but I still thought that it would be easy enough for me to learn more about that disability and how we can make this activity more accessible for people with that disability or a similar disability. So the nature walk that I chose was one that I've gone on before, that I thought seemed one that I really enjoyed and that I am familiar with, so that I had something to compare it to. So that this time as I did it, I was more conscious. Because the first time I thought it was perfect. So this nature walk that I went on was in Daybreak, and it's by a river, and it's really pretty. And the first time I went, I really enjoyed it. This time, I'm going to admit and be honest with you, I did not enjoy it quite as much. I got tired really fast, and I was kind of having a hard time keeping up with my husband, who was going a lot faster than me. And I felt pressure to keep up with him. I felt like I just needed to go fast, and then I got worn out really fast, and then I just wasn't enjoying it at all. I realized that I should have told him in the beginning that I wanted to go a little bit slower because it was difficult for me on crutches to go as fast as we normally do. As for the trail itself, it was actually really good. There were only a couple of parts that I felt like when the asphalt changed to regular cement, like sidewalk cement, it was a little rough. Like I felt a little bit like I might trip, especially if I hadn't noticed it. But for the most part, it was totally paved, the path, and it was really smooth and really nice. And so there wasn't much of a problem there at all. And yeah, I actually feel like they did a really good job making it accessible. I also noticed it was wide enough for two-way traffic. There were families that passed us, bikes that passed us, things, and everything was fine. And then it could easily be a wheelchair path too. So yeah, that was fine. But yeah, once again, the only thing that I noticed that made it difficult for me was the people. I remember in one of our first weeks of this class, we talked about how we shouldn't assume the things that people with disabilities can and can't do, but we should always be open and willing to ask, because they know better than us what they can and can't do and what they need extra assistance with and how we can help them. And so I felt pressure to keep up with my husband at first, like I said, but I do think if he would have asked me in the beginning, should we walk a little bit slower, I would have felt comfortable saying yes. Hi. I'm doing my video for class. That's okay. So yeah, if someone would have asked in the beginning, I would have felt comfortable saying yes, let's walk a little bit slower. But I didn't automatically feel comfortable just saying it and requesting it in the beginning. So the nature walk didn't last quite as long as I hoped it had. For part of the nature walk, we actually just sat down on a bench and looked at the river and the ducks swimming by and looking at all the trees and stuff. And I also was impressed with how many benches there were along the trail, which also I felt like made the trail and nature walk more accessible. And so yeah, I thought that was awesome. And so I think at least my idea for this part of my experience was that we as people need to be ready to be ready to adapt in situations with people with disabilities. Because there wasn't really anything, I think, that the nature trail in itself needed to change. But it made me realize that we, as friends and coworkers and teammates, need to keep in mind is that we need to be ready to adapt. And there's sometimes things that we can do to make things more accessible, so we need to be ready to ask others what they need help with and what we can do to make things more accessible for them. So, like I said, the nature walk didn't last quite as long as I thought it was going to, so we ended up also doing a Walmart run, and so I stayed on crutches as we went to Walmart, and this was a really interesting experience, especially with the whole coronavirus thing going on. Of course, there were a lot of people there, and everyone there was kind of seemed stressed and on edge. But my husband and I both noticed that tons of people were watching me and staring at me and looking at me, and I hated it. It was awful. Some looks were like looks of pity and like, oh, poor girl, and some looks were like people were kind of like annoyed of me that I was kind of like taking up more room in the aisles or whatever, and I wasn't going as fast, and people seemed kind of frustrated. And then there was also times that I felt like people just didn't know how to act around me because I was just different than what they're used to. And I mean, the aisles were wide enough for me to pass through, and it was fine, even with the tons of people. I don't think Walmart needed to become more accessible anyway. And the ground was smooth enough to operate and to move by. But once again, the people around me is what made it hard for me to be able to get through Walmart feeling just like everyone else and getting through with ease. And so once again, I feel like we as a people need to be more willing to adapt to others and their needs. I also noticed one thing is that my husband was carrying pretty much, we didn't grab a cart. That happens every time. We always think we won't need a cart, and we do. And so he was carrying everything in his arms. And then he was trying to open a bag to put apples in while he was holding everything. And I could tell he didn't want to ask me to help because he thought like I couldn't. And I was like, Noah, I can help you. And he was like, oh, and like handed me the bag, and I was able to balance my crutches and be on one leg and open up the bag and put apples in. And that also opened up my mind that people with disabilities are capable and they want to help and they're willing to help with daily mundane tasks, just like any person without a disability would want to do. And so we shouldn't, I think like Stella said in her TED Talk, we shouldn't set low expectations for people with disabilities, but see them for who they are and the helping hand that they can lend. And I think just we as a people need to become more flexible and more willing to understand people with disabilities, because when you don't have a disability, sometimes it's hard to see what it's like if you don't walk in their shoes first. So I'm glad that I did get to walk into their shoes today to see that us as a people need to be more willing to adapt to them. And so, yeah, that's my video.